It's like a Canadian salmon river.
The Prime Minister's floating potentially campaigning on state asset sales at the next election. Do you feel like you've successfully put this back on the agenda?
Well, I think we've put on the agenda that we need a more mature conversation. I see the reflexive knee-jerk from the Greens rule it out, as if the government can only ever buy things, and no matter how much money they lose, they should keep losing it. We need to be able to look at our balance sheet and say we own $570 billion odd worth of assets. Are they delivering for New Zealanders? Perhaps we need more pipes, pumping stations and roads for more homes.
Would some form of state asset sales be a part of what ACT would push for in potential coalition discussions?
I actually don't think it should be an either or. We should be continuously asking ourselves, do we own the right stuff? Because people work hard to pay those taxes. Right now we're paying $10 billion a year in interest on the $200 billion of debt that we have. That comes out of taxpayers' pockets. Do we own the right things for the debt we've taken on to own them? We need to be asking that question every day, not just, at some point with a binary debate.
Do you have a wish list of David Seymour's assets that he wants to sell?
No, because it's not about me, it's about getting a good return for the taxpayer. And so I would just say, look, are we making a profit from owning this? If we're making a loss, is it doing some public service that can't be done any other way? If that's the case, then we can make the decision, but you've got to have that kind of information.
Sure.
Sorry,
carry on.
Yeah.
But you mentioned QV in your speech. I mean, is that one of the ones that you'd be looking to sell?
Well, it's pretty hard to see why the government would want to be in the property valuation business, especially when it's serving another government in the form of New South Wales. Another way you could put it is, if we didn't own QV today, would we go out there, borrow money, have the taxpayers pay more interest so that we could own it? I think the answer to that is probably no.
And Treasury has started looking at all the SOEs and analysing their performance. Are there any that you believe would not be up to scratch?
Yeah, I'm really proud of that work. It's showing that on average, those businesses don't make a return on the money that we need to borrow to own them. Therefore, we're losing money on them. And then the question is, well, do they do something that we have to do as a government, or are they just competing with other private businesses that obviously anyone can do because there's other businesses doing it? And the answer for the most part is we need to ask harder questions about them.
What do you think the public appetite is for asset sales? The citizens initiated referendum was about 68%.
Yeah. People can get into that ideological debate. I think the public appetite is for better infrastructure, better roads, better pipes, better pumping stations, more homes for the next generation. And if we can use the $570 billion worth of stuff the government owns to get a better deal on that stuff, I think they'll go for it.
Is it still your belief that we should privatise the entire end of ferries?
Well, again, the government is going through a process right now of trying to work out how to procure them. But what the government signed up to is to set up a mixed ownership model company, and that might come under, the government has a policy of setting up a Schedule 4 company, which might subsequently have the question asked, there's a competing private business, are we making money out of this for the taxpayer to afford other stuff, or would we be better off without it so we didn't have to pay so much interest on debt? These are the questions we need to ask.
Do you think the public wants publicly owned ferries?
I think the public wants services and a country that works. It's actually a small minority of people, in my experience, who like to get into the ideology of it. Overwhelmingly, people say, can I get around this country, make a good future for myself and my family?
So if there was, a poll showing that there was public support for publicly owned ferries, would that change your mind?
Yeah, but there is a poll every day. People choose whether they go on the Blue Bridge or on the Inter-Islander. People are already very comfortable making that decision, and I suspect most people who cross the strait at some point have already made the choice to go on the private ferry. So, we can ask ourselves about the ideology. Well, let's talk about the practicality of people getting around. No, I don't, but I know how many ships each one has, and they each have a roughly equal number of people. So, and I assume that most people don't stick to just one ferry business. They probably go either way. So I think you could guess that at least half, if not more, have gone either way.
It's not just passengers, though, right? So a lot of the freight travels on the ferries. Do you think New Zealanders that use freighting services or buy any goods in the country would be on board with not having a publicly owned connection between the north and south?
Well, again, it depends which freight you're talking about. I mean, one major freight company uses aeroplanes, coastal shipping, trucks and trains, and the stuff that goes on trains can go in boxes on either of the two ferry providers. So when you look at their overall options for getting goods from Auckland to Christchurch, it's not just publicly owned ferries. That's one part of the mix. But if you ask people overall, how do they get stuff from one end of the country to the other? Actually, there's lots of options, and that's how we should approach these debates generally.
You said it was reflective for Chloe Swarbrick to say rule it out, but the Prime Minister has already ruled it out. Was it reflexive for him to do so in the first place?
What I've heard him say is that he's open to managing the balance sheet better, and in future terms of government he's open to doing it. That's a much more enlightened view than this kind of zero-sum politics, rule it out on ideological grounds. We ain't going to solve the problems we have as a country with the kind of politics that Chloe Swarbrick has brought to this debate.
Well, if it's so urgent, and we're in such a crisis right now, should he not revisit that rule out then?
Well, it's entirely up to him, but I just make the point, one of the reasons you need an ACT party is to put out the ideas that other people maybe aren't so keen on, but sometimes you find ideas that we put up initially unpopular, later people say, wish I'd thought of that.
Are there any healthcare examples that you think could do with privatisation that aren't at present?
Well, if you look at the way that we contract out operations, the previous government cancelled a lot of the contracting out of, for example, doing cataracts. Now, if you're sitting there with a cataract, you can get it done faster by a provider such as, say, Auckland Eye, which is in the Epsom electorate. What do you really want, ideology or vision? And if you get vision faster through a private provider, I don't think you care so much. Interestingly, sometimes the doctor is actually working for the government, but the surgery, what they call a wet lease, is actually owned by a private provider. So people get so hung up on this stuff. The reality is that right now every GP, every pharmacy, a lot of the surgery, a lot of the doctors are in private practice. There's already a mixture.
Do you believe
having a bank account should be a human right?
I believe that not being discriminated against on the grounds of your race or religion or gender or any other thing about yourself you can't change as a human right. Non-discrimination is definitely a human right, but the right to have a bank account requires that somebody out there somewhere has a duty to provide one for you, and I don't think you can say it's a right unless you know who's going to be forced to give you one.
The hotline that's been set up by John Minto, what is your thoughts on that?
It's absolutely disgraceful. You know, I grew up thinking John Minto was something of a hero because of the role that he played in the Springbok protest. As I've got older and got a little bit more to know, got to know a little bit more about John Minto, I think his behaviour is absolutely disgraceful and the complete opposite of what he stood for when he was leading those protests. What is it now, 44 years ago? He seems to have completely lost his way in life. I absolutely deplore what he's doing. It's disgraceful.
On the science sector reforms, the government's pivoting to funding research that might have commercial applications. Shouldn't it be the opposite, that the government funds the stuff that isn't commercial and the private sector funds the stuff that is?
Well, there's always an argument that the government should fund public good research. I understand that argument. I also just make the observation that if you're someone who works in a university and you know that you're not going to get a return on the research that you do, then that changes your incentives as well. So nobody has this right. I think there is a role for public good science funding, and through the universities the government will actually be doing a lot of that. But when it comes to research that can be commercialised, if I as a professor or a researcher or whatever can make money and end up being the next Whādi Mishriki who created power by proxy and sold it to Apple and made a lot of money and good on them, that's going to motivate me a lot better than having it all going into one pot.
But should the government be funding that stuff that could be commercial, right? Isn't it, I mean, to the point of privatisation and government involvement in commercial endeavours, that's this.
Well, I think the point is that most things are an element of public and private good. I think people want to have a go here, but look, I'm happy to have the debate about the nature of science funding and research another time, perhaps, because I think it'll really...
Just back on banking.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between discrimination and like risk assessment? So certain cohorts, certain industries might pose more risk. Insurers, banks, this pricing risk is like the fundamental to what they do.
Well,
what's discrimination and what's looking at factors and pricing accordingly?
I mean, if I decide that the ice cream business is very risky because of some theory I have as a bank that maybe people are going to stop, buying ice cream. Probably not a safe bet in New Zealand, but never know. then I apply that to all people who are ice cream sellers, regardless. If I start saying I'm going to give to one ice cream seller but not another because I don't like, I don't know, Jewish ice cream sellers, that's discrimination.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you very much, guys. Thank you.